suspect. I love that.
Yes. Suspicious.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks. This is amazing. Well, first off, my name is Paul M. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Paul.
First time in intergroup. So to first time here and actually be able to speak like this is pretty amazing. But I guess I'm going to tell a little bit about my experience, strength, and hope today. So where do I start? Well, first off, let me just talk about my sobriety date as a suspect. October 4th, 2021 is when it's when I came into the room. There's a story around that, but that's kind of when I started my journey. It's when I got sober. I have a home group. Obviously, I have a sponsor who suggested if I would be interested in this. Of course, you say yes, right? When there's a suggestion. And I currently have one sponsee, but I'm meeting with a guy tomorrow that might be another sponsee. So, work the steps. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, it's kind of a miracle to be standing here. It's amazing to me that I'm speaking in front of a group like this because I had a long drinking career that I thought would never end. I started when I was 13 years old, and I was one of those people, you hear in the rooms, some people come in, they're nervous about calling themselves an alcoholic. I was never nervous because I knew I was an alcoholic when I first drank. I was one of those. And as I tell my story, there's really two parts of my alcoholism. There's kind of what I like to call before my wife and after my wife, okay? And how that disease kind of worked and how it's worked. But yeah, I started drinking when I was 13, and it was one of those experiences that you hear a lot in the rooms where, it wasn't a great experience. I remember spinning out. I was actually at my grandfather's house. My uncle had this pop-up camper where me and my cousin would find an excuse to go camp out at the pop-up camper, but it was an excuse to go steal my grandpa's liquor, right? And the first time we ever did this, I was 13 years old, and I blacked out. I remember getting the spins. I was freaking out too. My cousin had to kind of pin me down. It was an awful experience, but I also loved it because I was so uncomfortable in my skin. I never felt secure as a kid. We can get into the whole family thing. I'm going to leave that part alone. But yeah, I found my solution. My solution was alcohol. And as I progressed, and I'm Irish Catholic. I'm from Massachusetts. I'm Boston, right? So I was proud to be an alcoholic. It's kind of what I kind of wore like a badge of honor almost as it progressed, right? I got into high school when I was a junior, kind of seniors, when I started feeling comfortable when I was drinking. That's how it started. That's how I made my friends who drinking. And that went right into college. But for me, that before the wife, like I mentioned before, that first 30 years from 13 to 30 when I was drinking, I didn't really have the consequences. I should have. The first college I went to, I was asked to, well, first off, they kicked me out on the weekends because I ripped apart my dorm room, acted like a crazy man. And they kicked me out. I had to go home. My dad had to pick me up on the weekends, and then they bring me back on a Monday. And I did that for like 6 months. And then it was just kind of suggested, back to the suggestions, maybe you should look at a different college, right? So in essence, I got kicked out, but there was no consequences. I wasn't saying, hey, go check out AA. Maybe you have an alcohol problem. I actually got home. I started drinking more, right? And that was just kind of the way it was. I went to my new college, joined a fraternity, and man, it was like I found my home, right? My drinking buddies. And that was just my life. That was just the way it was. And I actually, my second school, I was down in DC, and I would get thrown into the holding cell from disorderly conduct, whatever, no consequences there. I got a felony where I didn't even get sent to AA. Never these times. It's just like amazing to me, but that's part of my story. I actually embrace it, as you'll hear in a bit. I did get sentenced to a drug class when I got the felony, or it was a charged felony. They dropped to a misdemeanor. But again, it wasn't enough consequences for me to feel like I need help. I just felt like I'm managing life in a way, but this is who I am. Well, the first kind of grace of God moment is I met a woman when I was 30 years old, who's now my wife. And it's amazing to think like how like spun out of control I was at that time that she even wanted to be with me. And we ended up being together for 18 years before I even came into these rooms. And the hell that I put this woman through, it's amazing that she even stuck with me. We had kids. That's where things got worse for me. So when I talk about the two stages of my alcoholism, it's like almost like the first part with all those no consequences. That to me was all the fun. And I didn't have anybody else, right? Now I got her. And that's when I learned to start to hide my drinking, right? Or do things that I couldn't get away with before, whatever. So that went on and on and on. And, the consequences were like this. Like there was a situation where, back to where I ripped up the dorm room, I like to break things. But anger is part of my story when I was drinking. I would never physically hurt anybody, but it was furniture that I would hurt, right? And when I would black out, you wake up the next morning, all the furniture's everywhere. And I did that in my apartment. I remember my wife going, I think you need a little help here. But again, not AA, right? Never need that. But she said, maybe you go to therapy. And I remember going to the therapist and walking in, and the therapist is like, I think you're probably an alcoholic. I'm like, that's not why I came here. Like, I already know that. Maybe you should go to AA. And I just kind of shut that down. So I guess that was kind of a door opener there, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't ready. And off I went. And again, I mentioned the kids. But kind of flash forward for me, that moment when the door was open for me was actually in 2020, right before the pandemic. My brother, who's actually in the program too, he came out here to visit. And this is when he's kind of in and out of the program. I think he's kind of in it right now. But anyway, he was on fire at that time. And he wanted to go to a lot of meetings. And he's like, hey, do you want to go to a meeting with me? Not because I need it, right? So I went there to support him. And I was not going there thinking it was for me. And I remember when they got to me, I said, I'm Paul, I'm an alcoholic. But I didn't share, right? And I remember leaving the meeting and my brother goes, holy shit, dude, like that was huge. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm an alcoholic. Like, what's the big deal, right? And not realizing at that moment that was that door opener in my life, because I didn't come into the rooms till almost 2 years, year and a half later. It was October 21. But for me, it's the gift of desperation that got me here. Thank God. I talk about all this stuff, no consequences, even though I went to jail, even though I got kicked out of my college, even though my wife's like, what the hell? To me, I knew I was powerless over alcohol, but to me, alcohol wasn't making my life unmanageable. I needed the alcohol, right? I needed that to survive. But it finally got to the point. I actually changed jobs during the pandemic, and I did this job where in my brain, they were paying me to drink. I'm what's called a financial wholesaler. So I get this budget of like $40,000, right, to entertain people. But in my brain, it's a drink, right? And I just went over the top. And it was just coming out of the pandemic where we can get out there, meet people. And man, I had episodes of blacking out like I never did before. I remember there was a time, one of the last times I went to go golf, and I started drinking right in the first hole all the way to the clubhouse, and I was doing, old fashions afterwards, totally blacked out. I remember the guys trying to take my keys, and then he ran to like get me an Uber. I'm like, fuck that. Excuse my language. And I ran out, and I remember getting in my car, and that's the last thing. And I woke up parked perfectly at my house, laying down in my car. Like, how the hell did that happen? But that still didn't bring me in the rooms, by the way. But it was a few months later where, for the first time in my life, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to lose my kids. And I could feel that. I really could feel that. And it was enough. And again, back to my brother taking me to that meeting, which was a Friday night meeting. I think it was a 7:30 meeting, Salmon Bay, if anybody goes to that meeting. It was that, because I went there with him, it gave me that courage to walk in to living in sobriety. It was my first meeting at 4:00 on a Tuesday. And man, I'm so glad I did, because I now have this gift, right? The gift of recovery that is amazing. that I saw that sign and I took it. And because of my story and what I've told, it was my time. I was ready. Like, I was ready to do the work. And even though I didn't know what that meant, right? I came in and I knew I needed to do what you guys said. It took me a second to get a sponsor. Actually, the way I got a sponsor is kind of a funny story. I knew I needed to do that piece of it. I was going to meetings. I was listening to what you guys were telling me. And I remember being at this meeting and this guy's like, hey, do you got a sponsor? And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm thinking about it. He goes, you know what that is? That's your ego talking. And I'm like, ugh, I get all mad and I left. But that was the best thing that guy could have done for me because it got me the courage to call this man right here, who I had met in the meeting earlier, and ask him if he'd be my sponsor. And what a move that was. Game changer. This man's changed my life, man. Changed my life. You know, and as he says, if I choose, right? And that's what I've learned with this program is as long as I show up and I, you know, choose to make the right decision, things seem to be kind of work out. But for me, when I first started working with Bill, it was hard, man. It was hard. Like all of that, those 18 years I mentioned with my wife, and she had to deal with all this stuff with me. It's the first time I'm looking like, oh my God. Like I remember when we got to step one for the first time and he had me write out, you know, powerlessness and unmanageability. It was the first time I realized, holy crap, like alcohol is what made my life unmanageable. I didn't even realize this, right? Like I knew I was powerless over alcohol. I didn't get the unmanageability piece. But I wanted everything to get better right away. And I just thought, I remember 30 days sober. Me and my wife shared the same birthday, 5 years apart. And I was 30 days. We're having a birthday together, dinner. And I just remember she was just angry, not happy. And I'm like thinking, I'm 30 days sober. What the hell? I'm doing this. What's wrong with you? And my story is, as it might be with a lot of people, things got way worse with me and my wife that first year before it got better, way worse. She didn't really embrace recovery. And it was hard, man. It was really, really hard doing the work, doing the steps. But I did them, right? I worked through the steps. I remember when I met with Bill, it's like, all right, I'm ready to do these steps. When can I get this done so I can get my diploma and get the hell out of here? And he's like, oh, we're going to take our time. First, we're going to sit down. We're going to read the book. I'm like, oh. I remember the first time we did that. It's funny, like just amazing where I'm at now. How am I doing on time, by the way? 2 minutes. He wanted to meet at a coffee shop and read the book in front of people. Oh my God, I can't do this. And that was just another one of those moments of just being willing, right? Just being willing. And that's just been the story. Even when, you know, working the steps, when it looked like my wife was going to leave me, when I'm 6, 7, 8 months sober, still being willing to do the work. And I guess I should also mention, like I came in because I didn't want to lose my family. I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it because I didn't want to lose them. But when everything changed is when I realized, it's probably around step 8, step 9, holy crap, I'm doing this for me. You know, she might leave, she might walk out the door. I'm okay with that. I actually had that feeling. And I'm happy to say that that's when the miracle really started. About a year in, all of a sudden now I have this relationship with my wife that I have never had, not even when we first met. The intimacy that we now have, and it's all because of this program. Everything I have in my life is because of this program and this gift of recovery that I have. But I also recognize all I have is today. I'm grateful to be here and to at least tell some of my story. I'm glad, hopefully soon I won't just be a suspect. I'll be more than just a suspect. But it's great to be part of Alcoholics Anonymous and to speak today. So thanks a lot.
Thanks.